Welcome, everyone. This is episode 7 of the Service Lounge. And today with me, I have Zaina Zimba from our Merchant Services Department here to talk about credit card processing and why specific credit card processing at dealerships is so important. So, Zaina, welcome to the Service Lounge. Really glad to have you here. And, really excited to be talking about credit card processing, merchant processing. And I know when I say that, people may think like credit card processing, what are we talking about? But I'm really excited about the topics we're going to be going through here today. So welcome to the Service Lounge.
Thank you for having me, Brandon. I'm very excited.
So for those who are listening on who do not know who you are, Zaina, do you mind just giving a brief background of your history in automotive and what you're doing with merchant services? Just give a quick overview.
Absolutely. My very first job was in automotive. So I've went into parts at O'Reilly's. And then after that, I moved into BDC all the way up to a service advisor. And that's when I got introduced to Update Promise. I first came on to Update Promise as something similar to a BDC agent and then moved into the merchant services division. This was about 4 years ago that I moved into that division. So I've been with Update Promise for a little bit of time, and I've gotten to work under some great people here that have taught me quite a bit.
Well, I'm sure there's plenty of people who are listening on today that have had an engagement with you and dealt with you on support on the merchant side of the business. But the reason, and for our audience, the reason we really wanted to bring this as a topic at the end of the year is we know from a dealership's perspective, end of the year is all about planning, right? Planning about expenses, identifying where you guys may be overspending, and then coming up with processes that are really going to help and launch you into the new year. And what better way or what better topic to identify is merchant services, identifying if you have a great process there, but really talking about automotive specific merchant services. So one of the first topics that I wanted to bring up, Zaina, is talking about how important it is from a dealership's perspective, because I know there's probably 90% plus of dealers out there who use a merchant that has zero automotive experience. So when you speak to dealers and you're getting controllers involved, how do you start that introduction of, hey, it's important for dealerships to have somebody who knows the business that they're operating in, not just have a merchant who's taking credit card payments and charging you for it?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing there is a lot of these agents that don't work in the dealership space, sometimes they don't even know what DMS you might be on or that there's different DMSs or different management systems.
Yeah.
So that means that there's probably not going to be a whole lot of integration there for you. And with players in the game like Update Promise or others in that area, you have these really integrated portals that are pulling directly from your DMS. They're able to push it back into your DMS and save your team a lot of time that I don't think any of those agents outside of the dealership space might even be aware of is a possibility.
Yeah.
So that really helps start the conversation a lot of the time, especially in areas where they might still be using everything directly on the terminal.
Yeah.
And in some cases, you don't even have an invoice number in those areas, which, as we all know, can be really difficult to manage. So,
Well, we know, especially too, when it comes to issues, no matter what sort of tools that you use, whether it's merchants or your service tools or your sales tools, when you have problems, right?
Mhm.
Problems regarding money end up bubbling up to be the most important problems out there, right? So I've
Absolutely.
always said, especially when it comes to merchants, you got to have somebody who can support you and understand the pressures that you're in as a dealership when it comes to, oh my gosh, I've got a terminal issue, I've got a batching issue, something like that. So
Mhm.
someone like yourself who's got experience in automotive, who understands what those controllers are going through, or cashiers, whoever it might be, can really help to get to resolves a lot quicker. And I would say support arguably is one of the most important areas. So, what would you say is a common misconception for dealers that, let's say, are looking at merchants and they're not thinking about support? How does that play in?
I think a lot of times when you're not thinking about the support, you're being sold on other things, right? You're being sold on the fees and what those lower fees look like. And that's great, but at what cost? Because down the road, you're going to start having those troubles, like you mentioned, where you might not be able to completely line everything up, or
Yeah.
maybe there was a payment after the batch and you're trying to find that invoice number. You have specifics on a chargeback that you need help with. So when you start diving into those areas, that need for support is not just a need for understanding, but a need for quickness too. And I think that's something that we want to always make sure that we're bringing to the table. There's so many different support lines you can call, and I know that we've all been on them, where you're you're waiting for hours, and then the person finally gets on the phone and they can't even understand what the question is, or how it's playing into your day to day. They may not understand how your terminals need to align with your batch reports for the end of
Yep.
day. So it's just a lot to go into.
So it's been interesting. Over the last couple years, we've started to see automotive specific merchants pop up, right? Just last NADA, I can just count probably one or two that I started to see on the showroom floor, now starting to market to dealerships saying, hey, we're an automotive specific merchant provider. And I think part of why there's a shift there is because, to your point, it is such a high touch industry. When there's problems and when you need support, you're going to need a lot of help there. And I think it's important too that if you, no matter what provider that you use, but being able to have somebody who specializes in this industry can act as that middleman, right? You mentioned sitting on, long waiting support lines. You can act as that, right? The
Yeah.
providers that you have can be on those support lines with your terminal support to really get what you need done and really help you throughout that process. So I'm sure that's really important as you're dealing with, dealers who are like, I don't have time to spend 3 hours on a support line with Clover or whatever it might be. So they lean on providers like ourselves, right?
Absolutely. And sometimes too, just having that knowledge that we've gained over the years of being in that area, there's certain things that we might be able to even directly help you with that we may not have to reach out to Clover for,
Yep.
because when you've been in this industry for so long and you see the same continuous things across multiple locations, you know how to combat them. You know in the beginning how to set everything up so you're not even running into those, and then it becomes even less issues down the road and more easy to manage for you and your team.
Yeah. So let's talk about integrations. You briefly mentioned it ahead of time, but how important are integrations when it comes to merchants? And what are the key benefits that dealers will see when they start to use a provider that does integrate, let's say, with their DMS or their CRM, compared to just having a credit card machine in your service department and great, walk over and type in, your dollar amounts? What are some of the key benefits that you've seen dealers gain efficiencies by using an automotive specific merchant?
Well, with automotive specific merchants, you have obviously you're pulling that customer pay total directly from your DMS. So no matter
Yeah.
what, you're not having to deal with fat fingering. So you don't have to go back and worry about, did I accidentally charge them $1,000 when I meant to charge them 100? So that's definitely not just a benefit to the dealership, but also to the advisor too. You don't have to have that stress of accidentally typing anything in incorrectly. But in addition to that, we also can push when pushing the payments back. It makes it a little bit more conducive to, like, if you have separate cashiers, if your advisors are even cashiering, and let's say they get tied up with customer after customer in front of them, and they're not going back to remember to close out those ROs.
Yeah.
um, you don't have to worry about that not popping up on your distribution report the next day, because it's already going to be there even if they forgot to do their job. Mm.
Well, you bring up a great point, and hate to stop you there, but distributing and your actual reconciliation at the end of the day. We've seen time and time again where dealers are wasting hours of time each day taking hard copy ROs and trying to match up dollar amounts based off their batch reports, right? And identifying what transaction matches here and things like that. Can you share a little bit of that process? Because dealers who are using Bank of America that isn't integrated to the DMS, they don't know or even have any sort of little bit of insight into what that benefit is until they start using an integrated solution. So can you share what does that look like?
Absolutely. Well, anytime a payment is taken, the best part is you don't have to do anything. You don't have to type anything in. You're just simply clicking terminal sale, sending it over. But now all of that information is being automatically pulled. So your RO number, that's automatically associated. There's no mistyping there. It's coming directly from CDK or Dealer Built or Reynolds. And then when you have this finalized list at the end of the day, it completely matches with your distribution list in CDK or Dealer Built, those
Yeah.
DMSs, because you're going to be able to, it's automatically pushing in. You're not going to have any discrepancies there. And you're also going to be able to dial it back down to the person that took that payment, the person that, or the terminal it was taken at, who that was assigned to in the DMS. So there's really any portion of that payment that you need to dial it into is on your update promise report. But in addition to that, you also have your distribution report from the DMS
Yep.
that's automatically coming over as well, because we're sending everything into CDK or Dealer Built.
Yeah. No, that's good information that direct integration or pass through back can help to eliminate a lot of steps from the advisors, the manager side, cashiers, even the controllers when they're going through the reconciliation. We've heard, plenty of dealerships tell us we give them back hours of time each day simply because they're not having to go chase these one-off transactions and match up, because it's one click of a button and great, I've got everything in one spot and it matches to my deposits and it's easy to go from there. So awesome. Okay, let's talk about the big topic in automotive regarding merchant services, which is surcharging. And I always like to say to surcharge or not to surcharge, right? We hear it all the time that so many dealers are doing it and having good success with it. And a lot of dealers are going down that route and reverting back. So, can you give a little bit of insight? What have been some things you've seen with surcharging? And I'm going to ask some additional topics as we go through this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Surcharging, it's definitely popular right now. We've had a few of our clients as well switch over, like you mentioned. And I think what people don't realize when you switch to surcharging is, yes, you may be charging your customer that 3% back on a credit card, but when it comes to debit, you're not charging them anything. And you're also, when you move to surcharging, essentially moving your pay structure as well, or fee structure. And for those of you that may not know what fee structures are, there's certain fee structures that are flat rate, and then there's certain fee structures like ours that are interchange plus.
Yeah.
So flat rate will kind of group all of your cards together and give you the highest interchange, which is what's charged by the card brands.
Yeah.
So it's going to give you the highest interchange in that bucket. When you move to surcharging, it's not just doing that for your credit card fees, it's also doing that for your debit fees, but you're not getting any money back on those.
So somewhere where they would have been charged typically like a 4 cents on a debit transaction, right? And maybe 4 basis points, they could be getting charged, 25 cents per transaction or more, and more than quadruple their rates on debit transactions, when in all reality, they would have been in a much better spot if they didn't move to that surcharging process. Am I understanding that correctly?
Absolutely, that's spot on. And I think it's also what people don't realize, your debit is going to go up when you move to surcharging, because that's how your customers are avoiding those fees, right?
Yeah.
So your debit volume is also going to increase, and that's one important thing to think about.
So let's take it back to the customer experience, right? With the service lounge, we always want to know, what are the customers saying about that experience, right? And thinking about that process of, great, I've been coming to this dealership for 10 years, right? If I'm a long-standing customer and I've constantly used my credit card or whatever it might be, my debit card, to go do a transaction, and now I just went and spent $1,000 because I had a big repair on my vehicle, and now that dealership, you're having to have a new conversation with a long-lasting customer that, oh, by the way, we also have a new 3% fee. How has that affected the customer experience? Have you seen it's led to negative customer feedback? Has it not been, that bad? What would you say your honest feedback would be there?
I would say there's some obvious concerns depending on the side of the country that you're on, right?
Yeah.
Because we all know the East Coast, they've been surcharging for some time and their customers may be a little more used to that. But especially on the West Coast and out here in Colorado in this middle area, we've got so many customers that this is brand new to, and it's difficult for them to absorb. And a lot of our customers that have switched to that in those recent days, they've seen CSI scores drop because of that. And there's been specific marks on their CSI saying that it was because of that surcharge that they just don't want to continue to come back to the dealership.
So I've got a real customer comment here that I wanted to read off. And this is from Janine at a dealership down here in Southern California that says, I've been coming here for years, and this is the first time I've been charged a credit card surcharge fee. With how much money I spend at your dealership, I think this should be a cost of business. This shouldn't be something that's passed on to the dealership or to the customer, which I think that says a lot, right? If a customer is going to write that long of a comment regarding the experience for surcharging, they said they've been coming here for years. And now that small change that you thought was just going to save you money may have lost you a customer for the future that was a longstanding customer before, right? So I think that one comment right there is pretty telling to you really want to consider your pros and cons when you're switching to the surcharging process compared to what you're doing right now.
Absolutely. And just weigh out all your options. We've even had some locations where they maybe went with their parts department first, separated out those merchant IDs because parts doesn't really have those CSI scores. So it's a good way of maybe testing your customers and seeing what that looks like for you and your dealership.
That's great feedback. I like that. I think that's something that dealers can take away. For those of you listening on, if you're considering surcharging, maybe do a test case in certain departments there. Um, so let's talk regarding surcharging. I want to stay on this topic because again, it's been a hot topic for everybody. But does surcharging mean less fees to me as a dealership?
No, not necessarily, unfortunately. And that's where that's where it's a struggle because now you're putting more on your customer without realizing that you're still absorbing a similar cost yourself that you used to when your customers didn't have to also absorb that cost. So
So,
it
so to give an example on this, because I know you and I worked on this together recently, right?
Mhm.
One case study that we did for those of you listening on is we took two locations. One of our locations that isn't surcharging, and then one location that is surcharging. Same exact volume, so same exact monthly volume, around the same portion of the nation. So their fees, theoretically, if they both weren't surcharging, should be exactly the same. And the store that was doing surcharging, when we went down to their net effective rate of the actual fees that the dealer was being charged, it was the same exact amount when they were surcharging compared to when they weren't surcharging, right? But the common misconception, if you look at the actual statement, and maybe we can provide some examples on here, you'll see in there that there's a savings amount, right? But that savings amount isn't truly what they're saving out of their bank account. It's saying, well, if your fees were a lot higher, what we expect, then you saved this much money, right? But when it comes down to the bottom line, how much money am I losing on my credit card fees? It was the same exact amount from surcharging to no surcharging. Now, Zaina, if you can help explain why is that the case maybe here at Update Promise, but not the case if I'm using like Bank of America and then I switch over to surcharging? Why is there a difference there?
Absolutely. So each different program, each different surcharging program has their own setup, but they also, every agent or processor, they also have their own rates that they could be charging you. So if you were at an exorbitant rate before, obviously surcharging is going to take you down so much more. But at Update Promise, we always provide a flat rate. We're not really in that space to make sure that we're making money off of merchants because we're trying to just be your all-in-one provider.
Yeah.
And if and so we offer those flat rates across the board. Not all places do that. Unfortunately, even agent to agent, I could be on Bank of America, you could be on Bank of America, but you could be charged 20 basis points and I could be charged 5.
Yeah.
It's really just dependent on your agent. So if you are at 65 basis points, you could be saving money going to surcharging, but you could also be saving money just by lowering your rates on an interchange plus pricing structure.
So I think that's a key portion, and you explained that perfectly. That I think is a good takeaway for anybody who's looking at their merchant fees right now. The benefit of going with an automotive specific merchant is that you're going to get in with companies that are not trying to make all of their money on credit card fees. Similar to what we do here at Update Promise. We don't make our money on merchant fees. We make our money on our subscription service based off what we do with our fixed operations tool, right? So that's a huge benefit for stores when you're looking for new merchants. If you're looking for an automotive specific, it will allow you to possibly retain lower rates because again, you're not dealing with an agent who's selling to restaurants and local shops, and you as the dealer who's going, the higher rate I charge you, the more money I make. So I think that's a huge portion to point out, and something that no matter which provider you look for, if you're looking at your merchant fees, look for an industry specific provider, because if they're tied to another tool like us with our fixed operations tool, it may provide you additional savings from there.
Absolutely.
So, the next topic I want to mention is switching providers. One of the biggest misconceptions is I've been using this provider for 20 plus years. I'm not switching, right? Or the owner's not switching because we're stuck in our ways and we do not want to make a shakeup. Where's that misconception come from? And is it so difficult to switch providers when it comes to merchant, or is it simple?
There's always going to be some kind of J curve, right? Like that's what we are always telling our dealerships when we're switching them over to Update Promise. But it's the same thing in merchant services. If you have a terminal that you know every button inside and out on, of course you're going to be fast on it. But does that really mean that it's the fastest process for you and your dealership? Is that the best for you and your team? Because once you get used to a new product, you could be twice as fast with the integrations that you might have or other areas.
Yeah.
So I think it's really about evaluating your process and understanding that there might be some slowness when you're first picking it up, but it's not difficult to change, especially when you have that support and the training from your agent or your processor, and you know that you've got them that you can lean on. It makes it a much more inclusive process, and you don't feel so alone when you're changing merchants, which has been something I've heard a lot, in all honesty. People feel like they drop equipment off and leave.
Yeah. Well, I think that ties back to the support side of it, right? When you have that support throughout the process, it really helps out a lot. So let's switch some gears and let's talk about online payments regarding fixed operations and the service experience. I know that there's plenty of providers out there, great providers that provide the experience where customer, before they show up to pick up their vehicle in service, have the options to get a link and to pay online. Now, I will say the industry as a whole really hasn't adopted it at a high percentage. We've seen, industry wide across us and even other providers, that when customers go to pay online, it's not this exorbitant percentage. However, there is a key factor in there regarding satisfaction with paying online. So do you have any insights of how providing that as a payment option has been beneficial, not beneficial, considering that the adoption from customers isn't as high as we would expect?
Absolutely. I think even though the adoption may not be as high as we expect, it's still important to make sure that your customers have options. There's been so many times, and this is just me myself. When I've gone in, I've forgotten my wallet and I didn't have a way to pay. But if I had that mobile payment on my phone, I might have been able to just log in and pay it right there instead of having to go back and grab my wallet. And that's just one instance. That's not even customers paying from their home. So I think even though it might not be something they use all the time, customers still expect that convenience and they still appreciate it too when they have it. I'm sure we've seen plenty of comments come across our boards that have said, "Oh, I love the mobile payments. It saved me so much time. Didn't
Yeah.
have to wait in line at the cashier." People really enjoy that when they actually do use it. And I think even just speaking to it could get that adoption rate up.
Absolutely. So I've got some statistics here that I wanted to share, and because the common feedback that we hear from dealers is, yeah, well, not many people pay online, and I don't think they want to pay online when we have high dollar amounts, right? And so we did a study with 100 of our customers over the last quarter. So this is recent data over the last 3 months. And the average dollar amount being paid online was $606. So I think that debunks the thought process that, oh, if it's a high dollar amount, they're not going to pay online. They want to come in and they want to speak with the advisor and figure out everything from there. If the average online payment is $606, clearly customers are comfortable with it. And I think that goes to what we've talked on our previous episodes, that there's a shift, right? There's a shift in the demographics, the generations, newer, younger generations coming in that are more used to going through this online payment process because they pay for everything online, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have it, you're almost behind the times, right? You're not up to speed with everything else that these consumers are doing business with.
Exactly. They're expecting that fast and quick, easy payment method, the way that they pay on their phone, just quick Apple Pay.
Absolutely. So I'm going to share a little experience that I actually just experienced yesterday. I had a meeting about 45 minutes away from our office in our house. And while I was going to that meeting, there was a Ford store next door. So I figured I'd drop off my truck to get it serviced because I needed my oil change real quick. And I'd come back to go pick it up. I had that dealership, as I went up to the service advisor to pick up my vehicle, say, okay, let's go over to the credit card machine. I got walked behind the counter, had to step over 3 or 4 cords that were running from the computers to the wall to go to this singular credit card machine that then they'd insert my card. The service advisor turned around to have me put in my debit, number or my PIN in there. And then he was able to complete the transaction and go from there. And then we walked back in front of that countertop. For me personally, it made me just feel uncomfortable. And I could only imagine, like, I'm not somebody who gets uncomfortable in many situations, but how many of your customers feel uncomfortable in that situation, right? Like, okay, now I'm stepping behind the counter and going to these, maybe I'm going to trip over something that, we know that it's messy behind service advisors' desks. So being able to provide that up front, right in front of the advisors, and even provide, to your point, the mobile payment options can help to eliminate those sorts of scenarios that I literally just experienced yesterday.
I know, it's crazy, but it's not just convenient for these customers as well, but it's also convenient as a dealership. Like you mentioned, you don't know what could have happened behind that counter, or you also don't know what could have happened, like if customers happen to be peeking around the side of you to
Exactly.
see your PIN. So it's just, if people feel more secure nowadays with everything through their phone. It's all locked up, it's Face ID. That people really do enjoy that convenience.
Well, Zaina, you've provided a wealth of knowledge here. I honestly feel like we could go into this for another 30 minutes talking about so many more topics. So I appreciate you taking the time and look forward to seeing how you continue to grow the merchant side of the business and educating the automotive industry about, hey, let's start talking about merchants. So anybody who's listening on, if you guys want to learn more, I'll give you guys Zaina's contact information, even if it's a matter of like, hey, I've just got questions on merchants. You're not even looking to sign up for a new merchant. We're here to support. I'm sure Zaina's here to support. So again, Zaina, great to have you. And thank you so much for the wealth of knowledge today.
Thank you so much for having me, Brandon. It's been great.
Awesome. Well, everybody, I appreciate you jumping on. Thanks again for the support. We'll see you next month for episode 8. And again, we're signing off here from the Service Lounge. Hope everybody has a great rest of their day. Thanks, Zaina.
Thank you.